had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Good afternoon, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday. Time for another episode of Cello Chat. Very excited to have with us this week David Lescalleet. David, how are things?
Things are great. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, very much so. A number of things that
Sure. I grew up homeschooled. So when I was very, very young, my mother wanted me to take an instrument. And I think it was
excellent. All right. And so then your first schooling was where?
it was at a community I saw the relationship between the technique of classical music being stretched over to other genres of music. So essentially, the better you were at classical music, the better you would be able to play other genres, and the crossover would be much easier in that case. And
Excellent.
he was kind enough to take me on at that point.
All right, all right. Yeah, and we can think of people in other fields, jazz players who were classically trained, for example. Yeah. All right. So now you perform in a symphony
Mm.
and still do studio work as a cellist
I do.
and teach.
I do, yes. I have 6 students at a teaching academy in Opelika, Alabama. And I'll take on students every once in a while who need lessons, maybe even online. But for the most part, that's where my teaching is.
Great, great. Okay, let's talk about each of these things then. So when you teach, what were some of the main takeaways with your cello teachers that just bounce around in your head? You know, some of the main things, or when you're playing, that just stay with you on a daily basis.
Sure. So it's a very different takeaway from each one. Professor Ruzevic is from Croatia, and the main training I did with him was on technique. That is what I desperately needed at the time. So it was Popper etudes, it was Francom caprices, it was the Piatti caprices. Everything was technical, and it was about learning the function of how the cello worked. When I went and studied with Professor Warner, her approach is very different. She was a student of Rostropovich, and for her, it is all about the music. So we hardly did any technique, and it was almost exclusively rep work. So it was a nice balance between the two, to have a lot of technique, to be able to carry that out and apply that on your own to music, and then just have essentially a coach take a more hands-off approach when it comes to the technique, and then explain the music in a way that I hadn't thought of before. So that was very helpful.
Yeah. So then how would you say, as a teacher, how would you describe your approach?
A lot of it is technique. So most of my students are younger students. I have a few older students in the college age, but most of them are younger. So I generally take them through Suzuki. Uh, it's hard to talk about music with students that are not technically equipped at this point, only because it would be like asking a sculptor, okay, I have a block of marble in front of you. Go make a brilliant sculpture, and then you hand them a stick, and then they look at the stick and they go, well, how do I do this? They need the right tools. They need to know how to use the tools. So at that point in the teaching, it's less about music and more about critical thinking. It's problem solving. How do I shift? How do I break down problems that seem impossible into bite-size issues? Like Elgar cello concerto, the second movement, that scale, it's like, how do I do that? And if I just handed that problem to a student, they'd fall apart. That was me. But Ruzevic, and this is the same method I use. It was just a matter of breaking it down to very, very small bite-sized chunks. And then at that point, the music it's never easy. Nothing we do in this profession is easy, but it's manageable. It's doable. It's not impossible at that point.
Right, right. Yeah, breaking it down, that's such an important thing. Excellent. I've never met Wendy, but it's funny, she played in a piano trio with Sang-Mi Lee, and I was in a trio with Sang-Mi for a while, or a concert. I need to make sure our paths cross at some point.
Yeah, she's a brilliant cellist. I mean, just incredible what she's able to do on that instrument.
Yes, it is, for sure. So actually, maybe I want to talk about that next. Let's go there next, because a lot of people these days have videos online of themselves playing. And one of the things that struck me, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you on this show is your videos have demonstrate a really fine level of stage presence, which is a really elusive thing to teach sometimes. If somebody has something that doesn't come across well or strongly for their stage presence, because of course some people come across as very fearful or timid, and that's not so good. But then other people come across as, I know they're trying to be confident, but it kind of comes across as almost arrogant, and that's not so great to the audience. But you just look like you're having fun playing the cello, which is kind of our goal. So I don't know, maybe that's 100% just automatic for you, the way you play, but insofar as you think about that too, do you have any thoughts about a stage presence that's just comfortable on stage and looks like you're having a blast?
Sure. I appreciate you saying that. I never feel comfortable on stage,
I'll be
ever.
darned.
It is to this day. I still get nervous right before I go on stage. Um, I think it comes down to a mindset, and it's an easy trap to fall into because we are on stage and we are being featured. There's a temptation to fall to the spirit of narcissism. This is about me. This is about what I have to offer. And it is to an extent, but it also isn't. And what I mean by that is that uh, the greatest artists are able to have the art increase while they decrease. So it's not about you, it's about sharing something with the audience. And when you reframe it from, I don't want to make a mistake, to I want to share something with the people that I'm playing for, that changes the attitude that you have. So even if you're nervous, if you're able to mentally construct this image of I am an arbiter of this great piece that I'm about to share with people, rather than if I make a mistake, I'm the worst person ever, and if I don't make any mistakes, I'm the greatest player ever. That isn't what it is we do. Music in this way, it's not a well. Let me put it this way: there's a science to the way that we make music, but music in it of itself is not a science. It's an art form, and art is meant to be shared. It's nourishing for people. So if you go onto stage and it's about you in the moment, you've already failed. It's not to say that we don't celebrate the artist and the work that they do, but we're also celebrating the art form. And in that way, it's not about you. It's about something much bigger than you. And recognizing that helps take away some of the pressure we put on ourselves.
I like that. I like that. That's well said. Now, here's another question, though. It doesn't sound like your, at least as far as I'm able to infer, that your past teachers had an influence on the fact that, what is it? I think I counted 7 styles of music that you play, in which you play cello: rock, pop, folk, bluegrass. Was there country in there? Hip hop?
Yeah, I'm from
So
Texas originally, so a lot of country.
okay, but not necessarily some of these others, like hip
Sure.
hop.
Yeah, that was
How
an
did this
interesting
come
one.
about?
So at the University of North Texas, in my last semester, I had to take on an extra class, and it was jazz violin, and I was just doing it just to fulfill a credit and be done. And the teacher, she was a TA at the time, and I think she has a really great career now. Her name's Eugen Kim, and
Okay.
she said, "Just bring your cello. We're going to jam, and let's see what we can do." And we really hit it off, and she started giving me work, and eventually I met the head string teacher at UNT. Is a guy named Scott Tixier. He's a French violinist, great jazz violinist. I mean, he's a rock star. He had a cameo in the movie John Wick, just kind of as a fun fact. And both of them would give me gigs. The most high profile hip hop gig that I ever had was with a guy named Stone Mecca, who is the producer for the Wu-Tang Clan, which is, I
Wow.
mean, cello and something like that is just totally crazy. But it also was a great experience because I got to meet some cool people. It's a very different environment. It's not classical. It's very informal. They sit you down in the studio, and he says, play something. They hook you up with the track, and they say, all right, go. And you have to play something. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But there's something fun about the creative ability to improvise and come up with something interesting on the fly. I enjoy that, not only that pressure, but that creative boost, if you will.
Okay, I like that you described that as fun. I know that some of the people watching this do not necessarily consider that fun. They
Sure.
consider that scary.
Sure.
So,
It's a muscle you have to exercise. It's not easy the first time you do it, but over time it becomes it's not a technical issue most of the time for people. It's a mental barrier. If I ask you be creative, go, and you're used to just looking at music on a page, and you're not extrapolating anything from the page. I wrote an article once. You live under the tyranny of the literal, where if it's not on the page, it can't do it. If you're able to branch out of that and just try even small things, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. But if you're able to branch beyond that, then you will be able to exercise the muscle of creativity. And the more you do it, the easier it will get.
okay, I'll bet that there, in your case, was there more of an intentional regimen to it than that? Like, what did you do to start exploring what things you might like to do or not like to do when they just put it on and said, go?
Sure. It is, I hate to say it's mostly intuitive. Listening to a lot of music outside of classical is helpful. A lot of country music, I mean, in Texas, it's very easy. Country music is very popular. Hip hop was not. I had to actually sit down and listen to it and think, okay, what in the world do people think of when they think hip hop? Rock, I listened to a lot of 80s rock. That was very easy. Jazz, I mean, UNT it's a great classical program, but it's even more famously a jazz program. So jazz is abundant there. Going to New Orleans a lot was a lot of fun. So seeing the French Quarter, tons of jazz music, tons of musicians there who are not classically trained, but are just great improvisers. If anyone wants to get into this, I would really just recommend go and listen to different people. Go and listen to what people are creating. Get new ideas, get different ideas. It's not inappropriate to find people to ask just to jam with them and say, hey, I want to try something. That's the best way I think to get into it, is just to go in being willing to be the dumbest person in the room, so that way one day you're not actually the dumbest person in the room. That's totally fine. I started off as the fool, and it took time to grow this skill. It wasn't an overnight sort of situation.
That's well said too. Here, here. And again, it's you at the time who feels like the dumbest person in the room. But
Sure.
to the other people, I mean, like you, for example, if somebody who had never done it before asked to jam with you, you don't look at them that way. You look at them as just green, just starting out, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, you feel you have to get over that sense of feeling like an idiot. And
Yeah.
like, no, you're just new. Everybody's new at some point. Yeah, that's good. But then is there, do you remember something also about some arranging and composing in your background?
Yeah, nothing extensive as of yet. It's usually I've had people contact me for short films, and that's pretty easy to put together. It's usually one or two studio recordings, and then you just send it, because the short film is only 6, 7 minutes, maybe a bit longer than that. In terms of arranging, I do love to arrange. Popular. I'm a fan of movies, so any great soundtracks, I'll take a piece from that and throw it together at the last minute. And it's fun to have, especially for a concert, to have something recognizable for people. Go, oh, I know that, and it's an easy way to relate to the audience. And then you throw in some classical along with that, and it's a nice segue, if you will.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Uh, like crossover, right? They'd call it crossover repertoire or something.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever done anything beyond film, symphony, or classical in a classical concert. Usually the other genres of music fit outside the concert hall. It's hard to introduce that into a classical concert hall.
Right, sure. Okay, so a question I ask everybody, motivating students. That's just kind of the running theme. When you have a student who, for whatever reason, could use a little helpful nudge in terms of just getting motivated to either get the instrument out or to do the practicing that you and they know they should do in order to get where they need to go. What are some of your what are some of the things that you like to do to help motivate students when they need it?
Sure. I'd seen this question in your original message, and I've been thinking about it ever since, because it's tricky. There's some obvious ones, like here's a great recording of a great instrumentalist.
Yeah.
Listen to this great. Look how amazing this person is. Another one that I have found to be helpful is never falsify. You never want to congratulate anyone for something that was done in a mediocre way. But if you notice improvement, highlight that, point that out. Hey, this is much better than last week. This is going great. Whatever you're doing, keep going with this. And if there's no, and when you point those things out, the student will have an opportunity to notice progress, especially when it's genuine progress. The
Mhm.
Suzuki method is great because it has a nice building block, stepping block. We're past this piece, we're past this piece, we're playing on this string, we're now playing in this position, etc. At a point though, and this is something that I really struggled with, motivation eventually has to come through the discipline of practicing, and that it's an uncomfortable truth. And I hated practicing. I still hate practicing. I practice more now, but in my bachelor's degree, and Ruzevic was unbelievably patient with me for this. But I just wouldn't practice, and he would sit there, and he'd just take off his glasses, and he'd rub his eyes, and he'd sit back, and David, what happens? Why do you choose to play wrong notes? I don't understand. What happens? Why? And he was right. I just wasn't practicing. And eventually I had to have a tough conversation with myself that if I was going to make this serious, I had to actually sit down and do the grunt work of scales and etudes, and developing the skills required to be a musician. And that's not easy. Nothing great in life is. So I don't know if that will be helpful for motivation, but the other thing I suppose would be to say is that it's not uncommon to hit moments of frustration. I mean, at its most dramatic, despair. I can't get this. Why can't I get this? And it's not that you can't get this, it's just that you're currently unable. And we just have to continue to develop that. Some people catch on really quickly, some people don't. I've met people who are really talented who get things like that. I'm not one of those people. I had to work and practice, and it's understandable, and I get it, and it's okay. It requires work. So I think all of those things together help. It helped me personally, and this is something I'm very new to this still. I've not been teaching for that long. I'm sure this will be a process that becomes fine-tuned as I continue down this career path. But for now, I would say it requires discipline. You can do it, and if you want to do it, then you should pursue it.
And the breaking it down into smaller steps certainly is.
Yeah, and that was really helpful for me. The process of taking on big pieces was so daunting to me. To have it broken into bite-sized elements, it's less in that situation. It's less like pole vaulting and more like rock climbing, where instead of having to clear a gap at once, it's one rock at a time at that point.
I like that too. All right. So do you have Suzuki training, or do you use?
Yes, I grew up in Suzuki. That was my first introduction to cello training, if you will.
Yeah, I know I've mentioned this on other podcasts, but I'm really excited by the fact that the Suzuki Society of America and ASTA, American String Teachers Association, had their conferences together last March. And then there's so many ways in which those two communities can benefit from cross-pollinating as much as possible. All right, so there's one last thing that was on my mind, and that was, I like to do a bit of digging on the various people I'm going to have as guests. And you did what I thought was an interesting lecture recital about the, art needing to have some objective framework. And it's funny because there's a number of people, it seems, who they want to shy away from even trying to define art. Well, I know what it is when I see it, or something like that.
Right.
But I just wondered, do you have anything you want to share as kind of an overall takeaway of this idea of art being grounded in just reality?
Yes. So when I was doing my associate's degree at Del Mar College, the theory teacher at the time introduced us to 433 by John Cage and said, "What do you all think?" And I was 16 at the time, and I didn't have the vocabulary to articulate what it was that I found so disparaging about what I was listening to, or lack thereof, what wasn't being played. The lecture recital that I did, I opened with 433, which is where you sit at the piano and you don't play anything for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And it was the longest 4 minutes and 33 seconds, not just for me, but for the audience. I mean, when the timer went off, there was an audible sigh of, "Oh my gosh, finally, it's over with." I chose the topic, the postmodern conundrum, why art needs objectivity. And there's before I continue, there's an important nuance here. This isn't to say that art is purely objective. You know, this is good, this is bad. There's elements to that, but there's obviously the level of the subjective preference. So I can recognize the fact that, let's say, Beethoven Symphony Number 3 is a great symphony. I don't personally enjoy it. It's my problem. I love Beethoven. It's just not a symphony that speaks to me personally. But there's elements of the construction of that symphony that I can look at and go, okay, obviously this is well crafted. Obviously this is well put together. This is put together by somebody who knows what they're doing. There's elements that I can point to that do not belong to me, that exist outside of me, that I can reference to. My issue with the postmodern take on art in general is that it is merely subjective. And the word merely there is doing a lot of work for me. But it is a merely subjective experience. So I can look at, I referenced Duchamp's fountain, which is the urinal that he signed, and now there's replicas in multiple art museums around the world. And he said, this is art. And it's the act of taking a picture frame, slapping it around anything that you want and saying, this is art. Well, in this situation, the term art has become meaningless. It can be substituted with anything. It's like, if anything can be art, then we can also say nothing can be art. And intuitively, there's something about that we kick against, that we go, that's not quite right. There's something in that premise that's not working. So the purpose of the lecture was to ask a better question about art than was being currently articulated. The conversation around art had devolved into merely subjective preferences, and that obviously isn't true. Like, if I picked up the violin right now and started playing, it would be scratchy and squeak, and it would sound awful. And we would recognize it as awful. There wouldn't be a question. This is terrible playing. This is abysmal. David, what are you doing? Why would you do this? This is awful. Put it away. That's not just opinion. There's things that we can point to that exist outside of just, oh, it's my opinion. Yes, it's your opinion, but it is a correctly oriented opinion. The other article I wrote in a companion piece to the postmodern conundrum was the $1 million stick figure, where I laid out an analogy of a stick figure that I draw, and you look at the stick figure and you see that it's just a circle, a horizontal, a vertical line for the body, a horizontal line for the arms, two horrible diagonal, uneven diagonal lines. And you say, well, yeah, this is scrap. I mean, this is it's a stick figure. It's nothing. Anyone can do this. But I look at the stick figure and I say, no, Professor Whitcomb, you don't understand. This stick figure, the nostalgia that it evokes for me, I couldn't put a price on this. This is the most incredible stick figure in the world. How could you not see? How could you not see how valuable this stick figure is? What is wrong with you? And here would be an example of just me not knowing how to appreciate great art. My wife and I, we were just at the Georgia Museum of Art, where they have these incredible Renaissance paintings, there's incredible American paintings, Russian realism. There was Eastern Orthodox iconography. I mean, it was gorgeous. And then at the end of the exhibit was the modern art, which is just splatters of paint on a canvas. And they say, well, this means to me, this is the story of my childhood. These are the sounds in the bedroom that I heard. Something ridiculous that has nothing to do with the art in front of you. And it's not nothing to put these things together. There's no such thing as a meaningless piece of art. And one of the things that I've been trying to demonstrate is that when you are able to appreciate great art versus non-great art outside of the merely subjective, that it's actually nourishing for you. There's a great philosopher named Roger Scruton who said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but he had said that art serves no utilitarian function. It serves something far more important, the human function. And what happens is that if you surround yourself with things that are ugly and chaotic, like if you have a messy bedroom, a messy kitchen, if you have ugly art hanging around you, that's going to affect you in some way, versus if you live in a beautiful environment. I mean, even if you go to places that have clearly taken care, it doesn't even have to be art. It can be a well-manicured lawn. People behave better around things that are beautiful. It changes you in a way that's positive. And that's not a merely subjective experience at that point. There's something that speaks beyond you. In Plato's theory of forms, he lays out this idea where everything is an imitation of something else. So if I ask you to define a chair as an example, that might be difficult, but and this is the example I used in the lecture. If you have a couch, a chair, and a stool, no matter what it looks like, as long as it has the form of each of these objects, you will recognize what these objects are. There's something inside of you that recognizes the form that goes beyond you. And at the highest of the forms is the form of the good. It's something that we should all be aspiring towards. And if the good is not the thing that you're aspiring towards outside of yourself, then the hierarchy of values falls apart. And so it is with art. I mean, this is why music is important in this way. It has the ability to manifest abstractions that words and images alone cannot fully realize. And what you're putting out there does affect people around you. So it's not good. It's not enough to put out whatever you want and say, oh, it's great. You have to actually take the time to realize quality in art because it does affect people. In the same way a child wouldn't recognize the quality of a fine wine versus chocolate milk. If you said, no, the fine wine, it's rich in flavor, it's wonderful, you should try it. No, I want the chocolate milk. I want the pizza. I don't want the steak. And that's not because the child is stupid, or it's just a matter of ignorance. You don't know what you're missing, in other words. So that's kind of what that's a brief summary of the work that I'm trying to do currently.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And I mean, I do think that everybody benefits a lot from thinking about everything from the broader what art is to what is this particular piece I'm about to play, and what are its objective merits aside from the things that just happen to resonate with me in particular.
Yeah, I don't know if this has been your experience with your students, but I'm always puzzled when, if I ask you how do you make music? That's a relatively easy question, but when I've asked many of my colleagues, why do we make music? I get these blank faces and just, I don't know. I've never thought about that. And that's an important question. I don't know if you've experienced that with your students, but I've certainly experienced that with many of my students and colleagues.
I can certainly say in teaching a class like form, there are a lot of things that we do almost just like assume are the case about objective references and objective things about the grounding of art and musical art that that aren't necessarily, I mean, it's like in some ways they almost rise above whatever philosophy people claim to have. If you go online and you look up a master class by any number of great musicians, they're pointing to the things that make Beethoven's Symphony 3 great, and how this phrase goes to here, and how this modulation reflects this, this other thing there. And so, I mean, I think when I go to a performance or when I watch online a performance, I can kind of tell the degree to which somebody has put thought into these things, versus it's like being handed somebody else's fingerings versus coming up with your own. It's just that much more real. All right. Well, so upcoming performances, upcoming projects, what does the rest of 2024 hold in store for you?
Several symphony performances with a lot of the regional orchestras in the area. Most of my online work right now is on the app X, formerly Twitter. I've moved off of Instagram and Facebook, although I still have them available and I use them from time to time. But X has more options for writing, which is something I'm getting into. There are a few chamber concerts I have coming up. I haven't put the recording out, but I recently, with a new trio I formed, we just did Cafe Music by Schoenfeld.
Isn't that fun?
It's so much fun. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun to work through. We had a great time performing it. So a lot of music like that. I think Debussy piano trio coming up, Schumann piano trio, I just did Shostakovich piano trio. So I did a lot of piano trio concerts coming up. And I'm in the Georgia area until my wife finishes her master's degree at the same school, actually, with Wendy Warner.
Very cool.
Yeah.
The piano trio repertoire is so very different for cellists than the string quartet repertoire, you know.
Yes, yes. The piano trio is my favorite, primarily because there's more things for the cello to do. And the string quartet, at least in my experience, the cello usually is understandably it's the bass line, it's the bedrock, it's the foundation. And the piano trio, the parts get to be passed around more, and there's more flexibility. I like the writing more. The piano does a lot of the groundwork for filling out the sound, so it sounds huge, even though there's only
Yeah.
3 players on stage. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, best of luck with all of that. And thanks for sharing your time and your thoughts. A number of very valuable takeaways.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate your time. I appreciate that you have this podcast. This is great. There's not a lot of cello podcasts out there.
Yeah, it's I tell you, it's been a fabulous journey from my experience. Like I said, just even hearing people's the effect that, you know, how they found the cello and the effect that living the life as a cellist has had on them. That's yours is the first as far as somebody having gotten an extra cello. So
Yeah.
here you go.
It was just handed to me. It was fate, I suppose.
Right, that's it. Okay.
You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Playing the cello has so.
Okay, and everybody out there, you know the drill. Successful practicing all weekend and all week long, and we'll meet back up this time at 5 o'clock next Friday. We'll see you then.